Hello everyone, I'm James Milan and this is Talk of the Town, and we have a first today, I have to say. At Talk of the Town, one of the things that we really like to do and try to do is make sure we get to newly elected or appointed town or hired town officials sometime very early in their tenure and just introduce them to the Arlington community and the community to them. But boy, this is a first. We are here with Dean Carman, the town's treasurer, as of less than 48 hours ago. We happen to be here on the first morning that Dean is the official treasurer, and this is among the first things that he's doing. So we first of all want to thank Dean for being with us and for helping us create this first. And then we're going to have, I'm sure, an interesting conversation because Dean has some big ideas that people are already somewhat familiar with, and he's going to be elaborating on those for us today. So Dean, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Treasurer. Let me just start by asking you, I know that you've got a fundamental restructuring of this office and your position in mind, but let's start by just describing what is it that the treasurer traditionally has done.
Yes, so the Office of the Treasurer in Arlington has two primary functions, which is treasury and tax collection. So on treasury side, it's all the normal things you would expect, which is cash management, investment management, and debt management. So whether it's, the thing people think about most often on the debt side are borrowing for school buildings, public works projects if we're rehabbing a fire station, police station, buying assets for DPW. And then cash management being, paying bills, paying payroll, collecting property tax, excise tax, and the various fees that we have. So that's one side of it. And then, I sort of segued in when I said that, which is tax collection. So that's, the treasurer is also the office of the tax collector, which is when you pay your bills, that's where they get processed.
Yes, and we're all familiar, I think, from trips to the Treasury, the Treasurer's office here in town to pay whatnot.
Yep.
With that particular function. But I know that you have a kind of very fundamental restructuring of the office in mind. So why don't you just have a first pass through and then explaining that, and then I'm going to start to ask some questions about it.
Great, yeah. So when I ran for treasurer, I actually, my predecessor, Mr. Gilligan, announced his retirement, I think, on January 3rd. And on January 5th, I announced I was going to run for treasurer. And then 2 days later, I put up a website and started doing media interviews. And one of the things I made clear on my platform was that I do not believe that the treasurer should be a full-time elected department head in the town of Arlington. I just have a belief that after 200 years in the town of that position being as is, that technology and whatnot has changed.
So you're saying that was pertinent 200 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, when there was actually bills being paid.
Yes.
In a kind of much more traditional way, and there needed to be somebody in charge of that.
Exactly.
Less the case now.
Less the case now. And so when I ran for treasurer on was a platform that if elected, I would work with town manager Adam Chapdelaine to identify a day-to-day treasury professional to run the office. And so, now that I'm in office, we are going to endeavor to put in that and several other reforms that I feel are necessary for the town as it moves forward.
Okay, so I actually want to just interject and ask you about one particular thing, and then we'll move on to the intricacies of the new arrangement. And that is, I know that you have a full-time job already.
I do.
And so, out of curiosity, and because Talk of the Town, is interested in the technical aspects of people's jobs, but also just how you're going to manage to do things. How will you manage to continue as vice president and comptroller of Bertucci's, while I believe intending to work at least 20 hours a week, or up to 20 hours a week, at least initially? And initially, I assume is
3 to 6 months?
3 to 6 months, okay. How are you going to jam that in? Because I know you've got kids as well. And
I do. I think what I'm looking at is, when I compare it to other offices in this town, the selectmen all have full-time jobs, the board of assessors have full-time jobs, the housing authority have full-time jobs. So long-term, I think, one of my goals is, at least where I want to take the treasurer's office, is to minimize the day-to-day responsibility of the treasurer's office down to a much smaller amount of effort. down in that, let's say 5 to 10 hour a week. And to do that, you are putting more responsibility on the full-time professional staff to be full-time professional staff. And that would allow the treasurer to deal with fiduciary responsibilities, policy issues, and things like that. In the near term, it will probably, in order to get this to work, will require a lot of effort, which is where the 20 hours a week comes in. And I think that will go on for 3 to 6 months. We'll make it work. There's always, work days you can come in here, you can work at night, you can work at home, work on the weekends, things like that. But no, it's not going to be a sustainable, 3-year venture of working, 2 jobs. I think within my 9+ years of public accounting, though, at 2 different firms, I learned pretty quickly how to work about 60 hours a week. So, it's a sustainable thing for a set period of time, and then it's not sustainable after that.
Okay, well, maybe there will be another day at which I speak to your wife and children about this and, see how they're feeling about it 3 to 6 months from now. But anyway, so how do you then conceive of what, if assuming that you're able to put into place the changes that you're talking about, what will you, as the treasurer, as the elected treasurer, be doing? What will be your responsibility?
So a couple of things that I really want to set up in the treasurer's office is taking some of the financial matters that I think have really been politicized in Arlington as just too political, and making them more transparent and open and less political. And so there are 2 examples I'll give you. The first one are trust funds. So the town holds about $20 million of trust funds that it's allowed to invest in different investment vehicles that are riskier than cash accounts, CDs, and whatnot. And one thing I talked about when I campaigned, and I really want to continue onward, is creating what I would effectively call an investment advisory committee. 4 or 5 people that are reviewing this $20 million portfolio quarterly, reviewing the written investment policy, and making recommendations. And you can bring a lot of stakeholders into that. You could have a representative from the school committee that they put on it. You have a representative from the Board of Selectmen. We have a Board of Trust Fund Commissioners, and really make it a public and transparent process where people know, if I've donated money to the town, if it's in this trust fund, if it's in the cemetery fund and whatnot, it's invested in something other than, cash, a savings account or CDs, where the money is. And I think that's a role that the treasurer can play in being a facilitator of, the investment of the public's money.
Sorry, but these trust funds then are basically, they are the accumulation of a lot of individual or smaller scale donations?
Scholarship funds. If you donate money to a town scholarship fund, the Dollars for Scholars box that we check off, some different like cemetery funds, library funds, things like that. Yep.
And up till now, has there been no oversight from a committee in this way?
There has not. So the way it currently works, or the way it's statutorily worked, is the treasurer, as the elected custodian of funds, is in charge of the money. And I've always found that to be odd, especially after I got elected and I went to sleep that night. I woke up the next morning and I thought, really? I'm in charge of $20 million with very little oversight, except for the voters in 3 years who could throw me out if they don't like what I did. It just doesn't feel, to me, it doesn't feel like the right way to move forward. And so, as treasurer, one of the big things I do want to do in that regard is have a more transparent process that people can have input on. And if you're a library trustee and you want to know where your money's invested, you can go to a public meeting and look. And if you don't like the investment, you can have some input on it. Again, it's not the treasurer's money; it's the public's money. And so I really want to make that's one thing I really want to focus on in treasurer. It's on my list.
Anything else that springs to mind right away? Again,
Debt
it's
management.
The first day of the job.
No. Trust me. The poor deputy treasurer right now, he got my 4-page list, handwritten list when I walked in. I think he thought, "Wow, you have a lot of
trade
funds.
is moving already."
We're moving already.
Yep.
No, I think you'll see a lot of through the Board of Selectmen's meeting. I think you'll see a lot of changes in policies. In a collaborative way. So just closing out 1 second on the investment, is the town does have an investment policy. I will be submitting that shortly to the Board of Selectmen to endorse it. They've never publicly endorsed the investment policy, and I think they should. I mean, they're the elected executive board, so they should, and they appoint most of these committees, so they should have a say in that. I'm also going to look at some of the other processes, particularly around debt management, and how do we actually go from the approval of debt at town meeting to the issuance of of bonds, and what's the process of going to our investment advisors to to get their authorization, going back to the capital planning committee if there are any hiccups, going to the selectmen to endorse it before we bond it, and then after they sign off on it. Because it's funny, it's not just in Arlington, but one of the concerns you'll often hear from members of boards of selectmen in various towns is the way that the law works. Once town meeting approves a debt authorization, the treasurer can endeavor to go through the process and doesn't have to go back to the selectmen until they make them sign the documents. And so, I often laugh. I think if I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen and I have to sign a document that I had no input into, and not do you get into the specifics and stuff like that, but I feel like there should be some touch points along the way of saying, okay, I would almost call it a pre-endorsement. So before you go out to borrow, you go to the Board of Selectmen and you say, look, I need you to pre-endorse this.
Here's my idea, here's who I'm going to deal with, or whatever, that kind of thing?
This is the money we're going to borrow. This is how much we're going to borrow. This is how long we're going to borrow it for. This is what it's going to generally look like in terms of parameters. And when I come back here in 30 days to get you to sign a bunch of documents, this is what they're going to look like. Speak now or forever hold your peace. If you don't, if you don't like something, if you're not comfortable with something, let me know. And I wouldn't expect there to be a problem, but I think from transparency, if you're a member of the Board of Selectmen, you've got to be kind of antsy that, when the treasurer shows up and says, well, I've already done the borrowing, I need you to sign these documents. And if you don't, it's sort of, well, you have no choice. It's an Armageddon-like scenario if you don't sign it. So, good luck. Throw your keys on the table and, just do what you got to do. So I think you'll see a lot of changes quickly in that regard of creating more transparency and collaborative processes and things like that.
Well, it's an interesting, it's always interesting to consider, anybody who's willing to come into an existing office and really kind of look with fresh eyes at how things have been done in the past, and willing to, not only suggest but act upon fundamental changes. And it does sound like the ones that you have in mind, or at least the ones we've been talking about so far, are all about increasing transparency, which again is a touchstone in this town among all, lots of departments, and from the town manager's office on down. I know that is a value that people hold, so that all makes sense to me. At the same time, I'm thinking you are the third treasurer the town has had in the last 45 years. So, and assuming that you're, not I'm done after 3 years person, you're going to be probably doing this for a while as well, or so the track record would show. I think it's interesting that maybe, what do you think? Is it a measure simply of the fact that the treasurer's office is something that's on a ballot every 3 years or so, but people don't understand what the impact of that would be, so that they're not really saying, I'm not happy with this person, and therefore I'm going to vote him or her out. But instead, it's just another box that you hit, in a sense, and why not hit the incumbent because he or she, there's nothing that you don't know that they've done anything poorly.
Yes.
So it does seem like one of those town offices, which is both vital, of course, to the functioning of town, but not very well understood by most of the voting public. So therefore, things can just continue the way that they are, ad infinitum.
No, exactly. It's interesting because, as a lot of the viewers might know, there is a town meeting warrant article this year to make the treasurer an appointed position. So that very well could happen starting in 2020. But assuming for a sec it doesn't happen, and assuming that I get to implement a lot of the things that I want to do, one thing I tell people often is the result of the changes I want to make is probably going to be me getting a challenger that is then going to throw me out in 2020, because then it's a much easier job to look at. If you change it to a part-time fiduciary role where you don't have day-to-day management oversight of a department, and you don't have to quit your existing job, and it's sort of a board of selectmen on steroids, I guess you could call it, well, now it becomes a more attractive job. And so I think it's actually kind of funny, whereas, in the last 45 years or so, there have probably only been 2 or 3 actual contested treasurer's races. If it stays an elected role, if it gets changed, I would assume that someone will probably knock me off in 3 years.
All right, so let's talk just a little bit more then. Let's try and clarify for me and for our viewers a little bit more. You mentioned warrant Article 19,
Yep.
which is on the docket for this town meeting coming up, and that would be to change the role of the treasurer to be an appointed position, or not the role, but the manner in which
The position would be appointed.
The position would be appointed. Now, you have in mind, rather, even though that is the position that you now hold, there is a second position which will be in your formulation, that's the person who's going to be running things
Yes.
day-to-day basis, the COO of the treasurer. I don't know what
Absolutely, yes.
you would call it. But so tell me like where we're at with that,
Yep.
and what stands between this being an idea of yours and it being a reality within town. Are we hours from that? Are we days from that?
We're probably hours from that. One of the advantages of running unopposed is that you can start planning to transition into the office. And I was very fortunate in that I was running unopposed and I didn't have to spend all this time campaigning. So instead what I did is I spent time getting ready to actually govern. And I started working with Town Manager Adam Chapdelaine in late February, mid-February about what the treasurer's office is going to look like after the election. We had an agreement that said, look, as long as I'm unopposed, there are no writing candidates, nobody's grumbling that they're going to run, we'll start working together. If something happens, we'll stop. If that changes, we're going to stop working together. And as I said when I campaigned, I was going to go to the town manager's office and ask him to, endorse a candidate, give me or an employee, someone he wants to run the treasurer's office. Does he want to go outside of Arlington town government to give me a recommendation? Does he want to hire or transfer someone from within the government? What do you want to do, Adam? And Adam was very assertive in recommending the current deputy town manager, Michael Morse, who he has great confidence in. He's worked with for several years, and he thinks, would be.
Sorry, you said deputy town manager. But
Deputy town treasurer.
There we go.
Yes, the deputy town manager has asked me to stop saying that because I say it every time. Yes,
It does
the deputy.
kind of trip off the tongue there, deputy.
Sorry,
town.
Sandy. So the deputy town treasurer, Michael Morse, and is his recommendation to be the day-to-day department head as we work through this transition of the office. And so I embraced his recommendation. I, have endeavored to move forward with that. I've met with the director of HR, Karen Malloy, to see what we needed to do. Michael is actually a member of a union, SEIU, so we had to meet with his representation. We met with them a week or two ago. Overall, they were excited about him having this opportunity. They have, some negotiating points that they want to talk about to, largely to ensure that he's protected in all of this and doesn't get caught in the political winds, which I think is great. I mean, if you want to, beat someone up, call me, but don't pick on the professional staff of the town. And so we've been working on some points with SEIU. We're hoping to have that done relatively soon, and we'll get going. In addition to that, I am going to the Board of Selectmen tonight. I'm on their agenda and asking them to endorse the town manager's recommendation. So it's going to be keenly worded. I don't need them to support me. I need them to support the selection or the recommendation made by, the professional town manager who runs the day-to-day operations of the town. Okay,
so I'm a little confused about one thing you were just
Yes.
saying, and that is, from what I understand from what you just said, the deputy town treasurer,
Yes, treasurer.
is currently employed in a full-time position.
Mm-hmm.
And now he is going to be what? Doing that plus the day-to-day functions that the treasurer has been doing up until now? Or how does that work?
So one thing I learned a long time ago in business or in management is not to micromanage the people that report to you. And because when you start to go around them to their people, mm-hmm. you cause all sorts of problems. And so in addition to recommending Michael, what I've said to him is I want him to take a look at the treasurer's office. I want him to do a comprehensive review and tell me what he believes he needs to be successful in this position. And so...
including potentially more staff? Or is that...
He needs to do a review.
Okay.
He needs to figure it out. Again, and one of the things I said to him early on, I jokingly said to him is I said, Michael, I'll talk to you, you can talk to the team talks to you, you talk to me. But I'm never going to be a person who, reaches around him and tells him how to do a day-to-day job. because, when you're not there day to day and you start doing things like that, you're just obnoxious. And you're going to cause more problems than you help. And so Michael will do his review of the office. He'll let me know what he needs, and then we'll probably be back to the Board of Selectmen to tell them.
Fair enough. Anything else before we shut down for today? And I have to say, I promise the viewers and you that we will be back
Yes.
and chatting with Dean without too much time having passed. Whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's a month, we will be back for the next iteration of this kind of ongoing chronicle of the changes that will be happening in the Treasurer's Department. But having said that, is there anything else that we just haven't touched on yet today that you wanted to let people know? Hey, this is the kind of thing that's going to be, changing or new or newsworthy.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I would say, now if I said it earlier, is that any change that is made will be made very publicly at a Board of Selectmen's meeting. On a humorous note, tying into my prior appearances, there's a former member of the Board of Selectmen who I think has on more than one occasion expressed frustration that that they didn't have as much line of sight or transparency or communication with the Treasurer's office that they would have liked. I'm fairly confident that there will be a point in the next year where the selectmen don't want to see me anymore because they've seen me too much and I've taken up too much time. But that's okay because sometimes you better be careful what you wish for. So everything will occur. Any changes we make, any policy changes, things like that, will definitely go to the Board of Selectmen, and then if we want to codify it into the bylaws, will be done at town meeting.
Okay, so just to clarify Dean's veiled comments there. Dean, as you may know, I hope that you do, has been a regular on another series, Your Arlington Dollar, that has been crucial, we hope, to people's understanding of how the dollars flow in and out of Arlington. And Dean's co-luminary on that show, Annie LaCourte, is who he was referring to, who she's made her views quite clear about that and the role of the Board of Selectmen. So I'm sure that Annie is just happy in general about Dean's recent election, and I'm sure that will make her happy as well. I'm also sure that Dean has the plan and the goal in mind to make all of us happier with the way that things run, better informed about the way that things run perhaps than we have been in the past. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with you and in front of everybody. Because I know that that's what you have in mind as well. So
great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time on this first morning of your
pleasure.
Official new position. We appreciate it very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
All right. And do stay tuned for that and other conversations as part of this Talk of the Town series. We'll see you soon. I'm James Milan. Thanks.